What kind of person smashes a chicken coop in broad daylight, scattering terrified hens and leaving a trail of splintered wood, just because they didn't get their way? On a quiet Ohio farm, under a sky heavy with gray clouds, Karen Miller did exactly that. The air was thick with the scent of hay and earth, and the distant clucking of chickens filled the morning calm. But that calm shattered when Karen, a woman whose presence seemed to demand attention, stormed onto the property of Amos Reed, a third-generation farmer whose life was tied to the land and the animals he raised. Karen, with her loud voice and unyielding arrogance, wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to dominate. The trouble began over a simple dispute: a dozen eggs she claimed were defective from Amos's roadside stand. But what started as a petty complaint spiraled into a confrontation that would leave the farm in chaos and Karen facing consequences she never imagined. Amos Reed was no stranger to hard work. At 52, his hands were calloused, his face etched with lines from years under the sun. His farm, a modest sprawl of green fields and weathered barns, was his pride. The chicken coop, a sturdy structure he'd built with his son years ago, housed 50 hens that supplied eggs to the local market. It wasn't just a source of income, it was a symbol of his family's legacy. That morning, Amos was repairing a fence when Karen's SUV roared up the dirt path, kicking up dust. She stepped out, her heavy frame moving with purpose, her face twisted in a scowl that made the farmhand, 17-year-old Caleb, freeze mid-step. "You sold me rotten eggs," she bellowed, holding up a carton as if it were evidence of a crime. Amos, wiping sweat from his brow, tried to explain that eggs could sometimes crack in transport, but he'd replace them. Karen wasn't interested in solutions. "You're a scam artist," she spat, her voice carrying across the field. "I'm not leaving until I get my money back and an apology." Caleb, a lanky kid with a nervous habit of tugging at his cap, watched the scene unfold. He'd seen difficult customers before, but Karen was different. Her rage seemed personal, as if Amos's very existence offended her. When Amos calmly offered a refund and fresh eggs, Karen's eyes narrowed. "You think you can brush me off?" she snapped, stepping closer. Amos stood his ground, his voice steady but firm. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you. Let's keep this civil." But civility was the last thing on Karen's mind. She hurled the egg carton at the coop, the cardboard bursting open, yolks splattering across the wood. The hens inside erupted in panicked clucks, feathers flying as they scrambled. Caleb's heart raced. Loved those chickens, had named half of them. He wanted to step in but felt small under Karen's towering presence. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Karen, in her fury, grabbed a rake leaning against the coop and swung it. The metal head crashed into the wooden slats, splintering them. Amos shouted, "Stop that!" But Karen was unstoppable, her face red with rage as she struck again. Caleb, horrified, dropped his own tool and ran toward the house to call for help. But before he could, Karen's teenage daughter, Mia, emerged from the SUV. She'd been slouched in the passenger seat, earbuds in, seemingly oblivious. Now her face paled as she saw her mother's rampage. "Mom, stop!" she cried, her voice trembling. Mia, a quiet girl with a braid and anxious eyes, grabbed Karen's arm, but Karen shoved her away, snarling, "Stay out of this." Mia stumbled back, tears welling, and in that moment, Caleb saw something in her expression: shame, fear, and a flicker of defiance. It was a glimpse into a life where Karen's wrath wasn't new, but this time, it was public. Amos, now livid, pulled out his phone and began recording. "You're destroying my property," he said, his voice shaking with controlled anger. "I'm calling the sheriff." Karen laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Go ahead. I'll tell them how you ripped me off." But her bravado faltered when Mia, still trembling, stepped forward again. "Mom, you're wrong," she whispered, loud enough for Amos to hear. "Those eggs were fine. You dropped them at home." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Karen froze, her face twisting with fury, but Mia held her ground, her small frame shaking. Caleb, watching from a distance, felt a surge of respect for the girl. She'd just exposed her mother's lie in front of strangers, risking everything. The truth was out, and it shifted the tide. Amos's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop recording. The sheriff was already on his way. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up 20 minutes later, its lights flashing silently against the overcast sky. Deputy Clara Evans, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp gaze, stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. Amos lowered his phone but kept it recording, capturing every moment of Karen's escalating tantrum. She was still clutching the rake, waving it like a scepter as she ranted about fraudulent farmers and her consumer rights. Mia stood off to the side, arms crossed, her face a mix of humiliation and resolve. Caleb, back from the house, hovered near Amos, his hands fidgeting. The coop was a wreck, splintered boards hung loose, and the hens were still squawking in distress. Clara took one look at the scene and raised a hand. "Ma'am, put the rake down," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. Karen scoffed, tossing the rake into the dirt with a dramatic flourish. "Arrest him," she demanded, pointing at Amos. "He's the one scamming people." Clara didn't flinch. She turned to Amos, who handed over his phone with the video footage. As she watched, her expression hardened. Karen's voice faltered, but she doubled down, claiming the video was doctored. Mia's earlier confession hung heavy, and Clara's eyes flicked to the girl, who was now staring at the ground. "Young lady," Clara said gently, "you said something about the eggs?" Karen shot Mia a glare that could have burned through steel, but Mia's voice was steady this time. "My mom dropped the eggs at home. They weren't bad when we bought them." Karen's face contorted, and she lunged toward Mia, shouting, "You ungrateful little—" But Clara stepped between them, her hand on her holster. "Ma'am, step back. Now." The confrontation reached its peak as Karen realized the tide had turned. Amos, his voice low but fierce, recounted the damage. The coop, his livelihood, the terrorized hens that might stop laying for weeks. Clara nodded, taking notes, then turned to Karen. "You're being detained for vandalism and destruction of property. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Karen's bravado crumbled, replaced by a mix of defiance and panic. "You can't arrest me. I'm the victim," she shrieked. But Clara was already guiding her toward the cruiser, cuffs in hand. Mia watched, tears streaming, but she didn't move to help her mother. Caleb, standing by the broken coop, felt a pang of sympathy for the girl. She didn't ask for this. As Karen was led away, the farm seemed to exhale. Amos knelt by the coop, running his hand over the shattered wood, his face heavy with loss but also determination. Caleb joined him, picking up a broken slat. "We can rebuild it," Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. Amos nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "We always do." But the moment of calm was interrupted by an unexpected twist. Mia approached, her hands stuffed in her pockets. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can help fix it. I know how to use tools." Amos looked at her, surprised, then glanced at Caleb, who nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, a chance for redemption, not for Karen, but for her daughter, who'd stood up to her mother's lies. Clara returned after securing Karen in the cruiser. She handed Amos a form, explaining he could press charges for the damages. "The video's solid evidence," she said. "She won't wriggle out of this." Amos took the form, his fingers tracing the edges. Filing charges wasn't just about the coop. It was about justice for the chaos Karen had unleashed. He signed it, his signature steady. As Clara drove off with Karen still shouting from the back seat, the farm fell quiet again, save for the distant clucks of the hens settling down. Mia stayed, picking up debris alongside Caleb, her movements slow but deliberate. The sky began to clear, a sliver of sunlight breaking through, casting long shadows across the field. Karen's downfall was as swift as it was inevitable. In the county courthouse a week later, the judge didn't mince words. The video evidence, combined with Mia's testimony and Amos's detailed account of the damages, painted a clear picture. Karen faced charges of vandalism and destruction of private property, with repair costs estimated at over $2,000. Her attempts to spin the narrative claiming she was provoked and defending her rights fell flat. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, fined her heavily and ordered community service, warning that any further incidents would mean jail time. Karen sat in the courtroom, her once loud voice reduced to a sullen mutter, her face a mask of resentment. Mia wasn't there. She'd chosen to stay away, spending her days at the farm instead, helping Amos and Caleb rebuild. The coop's destruction had been a blow, but it was more than wood and nails. For Amos, it was a violation of his life's work. Yet, as he watched Karen's empire of entitlement crumble, he felt a strange sense of closure. The farm was healing. The hens, though rattled, were laying again, and the new coop stronger, sturdier was taking shape under Caleb's and Mia's hands. Mia's presence was the unexpected gift. She worked quietly, her skill with a hammer surprising Amos. She spoke little, but when she did, it was about the future, her plans to leave home, to escape her mother's shadow. Caleb, who'd grown protective of her, listened, offering quiet encouragement. The farm, once a battleground, became a place of redemption, where broken things could be mended. Karen's absence left a void, but it was one that allowed others to grow. Mia, free from her mother's domineering presence, began to smile more, her hands steady as she nailed boards or fed the chickens. Amos saw in her the same resilience he'd cultivated over decades of farming through droughts, storms, and now this. He didn't forgive Karen, but he didn't dwell on her either. The charges he'd filed weren't about revenge. They were about protecting what mattered. The law had done its part, holding Karen accountable, but the real victory was in the rebuilding. The coop stood taller now, painted red, a testament to survival. In the weeks that followed, the farm became a quiet beacon of hope. Neighbors stopped by, bringing tools or extra feed. Their support a reminder that Karen's chaos was an anomaly in a community that valued hard work and kindness. Mia stayed on, saving her earnings from odd jobs to fund her dream of college. Caleb, inspired by her determination, started talking about his own plans, maybe veterinary school, to care for animals like the hens he'd protected. Amos watched them, his heart full. The land had a way of teaching lessons, he thought, not just about growth but about standing up, about rebuilding after someone tries to tear you down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amos stood by the new coop, watching the hens settle in. Mia and Caleb were laughing nearby, tossing hay at each other, their voices light. The scars of that day with Karen lingered, the cracked fence post, the memory of her rage, but they were fading, replaced by something stronger. Life on the farm wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that honesty, there was a truth Karen could never touch. No matter how loud someone screams, how much they destroy, the quiet work of building back up will always win. The chickens clucked softly, the sky turned gold, and Amos knew they'd be okay.